Welcome to another episode of the Transforming Lives panel podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Charmin Prince.
I'm your other host, Mitzi Dadoon, and we have a guest with us today who we will introduce in a little bit more detail shortly. Her name is Mary Beth O'Connor. After a briefing, we will introduce her further.
Thank you, Mitzi. Just join me in a brief breathing exercise so that we can be grounded there. By taking a deep inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth. Again, in and out. In and out. In and hold it. And think about all the things that served you well today. Let go of those that didn't. Take another deep breath in. And on this exhale, let go of the things that are waiting for you to complete. And on this inhale, focus on what we're about to discuss for the next 25 to 30 minutes. Exhale, breathe normally, and join us back into the room. Thank you for grounding with us. Today's guest is Mary Beth, a woman whose life story is a testament to the power of resilience. After overcoming addiction, trauma, and anxiety, she didn't just recover. She rebuilt her life in a profound way. From attending law school 6 years into her sobriety, she went on to become a federal administrative law judge. She's now a director for the She Recovers Foundation and Life Ring Secular Recovery, a writer and a passionate advocate, training professionals and speaking about multiple paths to healing. Her memoir is From Junkie to Judge: One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. Mary Beth, welcome to the Transforming Lives panel podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Is there anything you would like to add?
That's the whole arc. I guess the only thing I would add is that the origin of the substance use was, it's just part of my story is unusual, but the beginning was actually fairly common, and that is childhood abuse led to childhood addiction. And that's sort of the pathway in for me, and that's the pathway in for a lot of us.
Yes, and thank you for mentioning that, because it is the pathway, and just to addiction to so many other social problems. So thank you for mentioning that. When I read your bio and I saw the title of your memoir, From Junkie to Judge, it made me smile. But let's start at the beginning of that journey. Can you take us back to 1994? What?
Yeah. So 94 is when I got sober. I have 31 years. But in 94, I was 32 years old. I had been using meth for 15 years. I was an IV meth addict for a lot of that time. And the last 10 years were really miserable after college. I couldn't hold a job. I was feeling very trapped and hopeless and miserable. And my partner was ready to throw me out. And it was very debilitating, exhausting place to be. And so that's finally when I said, maybe I should go to rehab. I partly say that because in the movies, it's always like this light bulb moment, one big event. But for a lot of us, it's sort of a wearing down process. And that's what it was for me. It was a real wearing down process. And by 32, I was like, I couldn't move. I just couldn't move. I was so boxed in and so unhappy.
And you started meth in your teens?
Yeah, I mean, my first drug was when I was 12 and it was alcohol. I did a lot of weed, there were pills around, did a lot of hallucinogens. But when I was 16, I found methamphetamine and that became my drug of choice. And I was shooting meth, injecting meth within 6 months at 17 years old. So it was a pretty fast and severe escalation. I mean, even in the druggie group that I hung out with, I was on the extreme end of drug use.
How many tries did it take you to actually recover when you finally decided to? Like, were there many times, and did you ever have any near death experiences?
Yeah, so it depends on everything, sort of like how you look at it, right? So I will say that perfect abstinence from day one, it happens, but it's not the normal path. I mean, most of us are literally unable to do that. And I wasn't able to do that either. So I went to rehab in August and I used methamphetamine 3 times in the next 5 months. So my sobriety date is January of 94, although I went into rehab 5 months earlier. But I don't really view that as like failures. I mean, 3 times in 5 months was a vast improvement over what I had been doing. And so I don't think of it as like failed, succeeded. To me, it was just I didn't have the skills that I needed in order to be perfect from day one. Most people don't. It's sort of like there's two things going on. One is that your brain is screaming at you, you need those drugs. Okay. But the other side is that when you take away the drugs, all the emotions that the drugs have sort of been tamping down start to come up. Plus, you have to sort of look at your destroyed life. And so, under those circumstances, it's really difficult to be perfect. And so, it's usually a process. And I say that for the people struggling, but also for their friends and family members who has a slip, they just understandably get very discouraged and very upset. And so I just reinforce it is normal for it to be a process to get to the point that you're actually able to maintain long-term sobriety.
And according to motivational interviewing, relapse is a part of recovery, right? It's remarkable that after 15 years, you just did it 3 times in 5 months.
Yeah, that was pretty darn good, wasn't it?
And I love that you didn't have like this dramatic story or event which force you into recovery or into treatment. And was it difficult transitioning from being addicted for so many years and into sobriety? How was that process for you?
Yeah, so it was a couple things. One is that I also had to deal with my trauma. Like I knew I had physical and sexual abuse inside the home. I had a violent boyfriend. I had multiple sexual assaults outside the home. So sort of wide and deep trauma history. And I always knew that was a big factor in my ongoing drug use. It was trying to manage that pain. And so when I got home from rehab, I knew that I needed a therapist. And so I found a therapist with trauma expertise. And today we do know that when someone goes in for substance treatment, they should be evaluated for other mental health conditions on intake. Like, and I will emphasize addiction, substance use disorder is a mental health disorder. That's what it is. But should be evaluated. What do they also have depression? Or like me, I had PTSD and I didn't know it. I had very severe anxiety. The odds of success are going to be a lot higher if you tackle both. And I did have sort of that intuition that I need to deal with that trauma or I'm not going to be able to maintain sobriety. But even if I could, I wasn't going to be happy. I wasn't going to be productive. And so my recovery was both my sobriety recovery and my trauma mental health recovery at the same time, working on them simultaneously. And they sort of reinforce each other as you go along.
Excellent. I'm happy that you raised the point of the importance of a mental health evaluation, because oftentimes, if it's relatives and loved ones, they're focused on the addiction
Yes, yes.
and not on the mental health aspect of it, or even the trauma that have fueled the addiction. So
Mhm.
thank you for highlighting that. Now, 6 years after your recovery, you decided to go to law school. What a fascinating story. Was that a lifelong dream? How did that happen?
Yeah, when I went to college, I actually always did intend to go to law school. But now I grew up in a very sort of working class family. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college before me, but my plan was law school. And I actually did go to law school right out of college. But my addiction was so bad that I gave it back. Like I withdrew. I gave back a top 10 law school, Berkeley Law, because of my addiction. So it was this horrible loss. I hated driving by that building. Like it was agonizing. And when I got sober, though, I'm 32, another 10 years had gone by. I was in no shape to like get a career job or try to tackle law school. I mean, my term is that when I got out of rehab, my first professional goal was literally, let's not get fired again. Like that's sort of where I was. And I had to start there. So my first jobs were sort of administrative work, just to get back in the habit of showing up on time and doing a good job. And over those 6 years, I worked my way into middle management at a high tech company. And then I felt like I was ready. At 39 is when I went to law school. So it was my original goal. I had lost it. And then at 6 years sober, it was a very sort of cherry on the top of my recovery that I was able to get that back and go to Berkeley Law when I was 39 years old. Yeah.
Now, did you ever have any arrests or anything when you were on your drug addiction? Because like, how does that play into wanting to go to law school and then become a judge if you've had, and typically if people are using drugs, there's often arrests that happen in there.
That's true. And so for me, I had one arrest when I was 18, and I was treated really lightly. I was arrested for a felony, but I was only convicted of like a low-level disorderly person offense. It was a very low-level crime. And then they gave me the right to expunge my record, to clean my record if I didn't get arrested for 5 more years. But the other side of that was that I was well aware that part of the reason I didn't have a bigger criminal record is because I was a white middle class woman. And that's just the truth of it. The last 10 years I was using, I had meth on me every day. And I was stopped by the police multiple times for traffic violations or minor accidents, and I was never searched. And if I would have been living in a more impoverished community, or if I would have been a person of color, the odds are that I would have been searched. They would have found the drugs. And then people of color, the charges are usually higher, the sentences are longer. It would have really derailed me. So I was always well aware that I was privileged in that. We didn't know that term at that time, it wasn't used, but I was well aware that I was sort of flying under the radar because of my economic and racial class.
Mary Beth, thank you for being so open, so honest, to talk about your privilege and how it has benefited you. Because oftentimes most persons are not comfortable enough to admit that. So I respect you more for that. Thank you.
I mean, look, I worked hard for law school and all those things, but at the same time, I had an advantage. And I think it can be both, right? It can be that it was hard work, but also that if I would have had a longer criminal record, or if the first time I got arrested, I would have been treated more harshly, my life would have taken a very different avenue. And that is the reality of it. And so when I do train lawyers and judges, and that's one of the unfairness of the criminal justice system in regard to drugs, because that's my focus, drugs. I talk to them about that and bring that to their attention and make sure they think about that and that they're more aware of it. It's really important. I mean, our criminalization system in the US is problematic on multiple fronts, but when there's such a vast racial disparity, to me, it loses all legitimacy literacy that it could even theoretically have. But there's also many other issues, many other issues.
Thank you so much for that. You're so open about your trauma and recovering from trauma. You mentioned PTSD, that so many addicts or substance users are burdened with, and even family members. How can you encourage loved ones to support persons who are addicted and have especially childhood trauma?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things when I talk to parents on the prevention side is to try to raise their awareness that mental health disorders that aren't treated, and the teenage years are when a lot of these conditions sort of, fully develop. If those mental health conditions aren't treated promptly when they're teenagers, and if any childhood traumas aren't treated promptly, their odds of developing an addiction are vastly higher. And so it's really important to pay attention at that front end. But if you see a teenager who's using drugs to excess, that is a red flag that there's probably something else going on. And so, like you said, the investigation shouldn't just be about the drugs, it should be about what's underneath the drug use so that all of it can be addressed. And then for people looking for help, I always encourage them, you need to interview treatment facilities. Do you evaluate me? Give me a full mental health evaluation. If I have other mental health disorders, will I be treated for them there? Or will I be able to go outside and get that treatment? Will you give me medication if I need medication? You have all those kind of conversations. Because when people aren't treated for the underlying issue, a lot of times they won't succeed at being sober. And then they feel like a failure. Their family's getting frustrated, but really they were never given everything they needed to have like the best possible chance to succeed. And that's heart-wrenching to know that someone feels like it was their fault when in reality they weren't offered a sort of a robust treatment plan to help them recover.
You mentioned something, and I just happened to have heard something today about it, which is when you are abused by someone, you tend to doubt yourself, versus when you are abused by a stranger, you have trust issues with the world. You internalize it and personalize it. Is that sort of what you have seen as well? And how did you deal with the fact that as you're going through your recovery, your family is your family, but your family is also who's abused you?
Yeah, I mean, the other side of that coin is that when it's outside the home, it can be repetitive, but a lot of times it's a one-time event. But when you're living with it in the home, you're trapped, right? You're a child. This is someone that you're going to be keeping on living with. And that is a sort of a more severe, it's more likely to create PTSD because you're living in a situation where it's ongoing and where you really are sort of helpless in the situation. And so that is more likely to cause somebody to develop PTSD or depression or anxiety or to turn to substances than if it was like, let's say, a one-time event that happened outside of the home. There can be that distinction. And in the home, it is the people that are supposed to care for you are the ones who are the problem, and that does have a different impact on sort of your mental development. And especially when you're a child, your brain's still developing, and these are your circumstances. And then what you do when you get sober, everyone who gets in early sobriety does have to really think about who it is safe for them to be around. And that's friends, the people that you were using drugs with, and that's family members. Or at what level can you engage? Maybe your mother, let's just say, or your father is very triggering for you because they're verbally abusive or their behaviors trigger you. Maybe you can talk to them on the phone or do Zoom, but you don't want to be in person for the first 6 months. There's degrees of protection. Some people you have to cut off completely for a while. Some people you have to cut off completely forever. Some people you can put them in a more distant box for a while while you're getting your recovery stable, and then you can revisit it, when you feel safe to be around them, closer or for longer or whatever that is. Those are really important decisions that we need to make in early recovery.
I'd like to pivot because you mentioned something in your bio about multiple paths to healing. And I'd like for you to unpack that for us.
So, like, let's just take peer support. There are 12 steps, right? Which is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and all of the many anonymouses. And that's one philosophy and one program. And the meeting format is a certain way. That works for some people, but for many others, it's not a good fit. And so there's other peer support groups. There's Women for Sobriety, Life Rings Secular Recovery, She Recovers Foundation, or Smart Recovery. So looking at which group feels most comfortable for you, which philosophy fits you better. That's one type of multiple pathways. But it's also about, do I also need a mental health treatment? Do I need physical treatment? Am I a faith-based person and I'm going to incorporate my church, my faith community in it? Do I like to do I find meditation or yoga or dance to be energy release or a stress reducer? Am I really comfortable with being with large groups of people, or do I like coffees and one-on-one chats with people that are in recovery? Do I like to read memoirs? Do I like to listen to podcasts? So multiple pathways can mean all those things. It's really the idea that my recovery plan might be different than your recovery plan, and that we need to honor that and accept that. Like when I tell my story, I view it as valuable for people to hear how I did it because I succeeded, but I share it with an attitude of for your consideration, rather than you've got to do what I did. Like this is the way it must be done. It's really more a matter of sharing it in an intent of help and of offering ideas, but not in a sort of an ego-driven way that you have to recover my way. And the other part of it is that recovery plans and needs change over time. And so what works for us or is a good fit in the beginning, it might be different 2 years later. So all those sort of ideas are part of what's meant by multiple pathways.
If you have to encourage someone, or most times relatives are the supporters or the person who are doing the intervention for loved one, how would you encourage them to support their loved ones? Because oftentimes it might be a religious family and wants the person to take the religious pathway when the person doesn't feel that at the moment. Mental health is more important than the religious pathway. How do you encourage that family member or family members?
Well, I'll give a couple of encouraging data points first, and then I'll go into a little more detail on that. But we hear a lot about only 10% of people recover or 15% or some terrible numbers, and that's absolutely not true. So that is really more focused on each effort, but in their lifetime, 75% of the people who at one point met the criteria for having a substance use disorder and addiction, they will recover to the point that they don't meet the criteria anymore. And another positive data point is that once people get 5 years of continuous sobriety, they have an 85% chance of never relapsing again. And so I throw that out because people can get so frustrated and fearful about the timing of the process taking longer than they like, but to know that the outcome's likely to be positive helps. And then the other thing I always recommend for friends and family is that they look at CRAFT, which is community reinforcement and family training. It's the alternative to that tough love ideology, and it's actually twice as effective as tough love. And there's a really good book based on CRAFT that I recommend for families, and it's called Beyond Addiction. And so it's more focused on positive reinforcement, but also on having sort of non-emotional, like let's just have a conversation, non-judgmental discussions about sort of like, what are the drugs doing for you? What need do you think they're meeting? Can we meet that need in another way? What do you think's underneath it? And then what the families can, where they can offer help and where they really have to sort of stand back and let the loved one sort of guide the train. But then also that the families and the friends often do need their own support and their own help, because it is a type of trauma to have someone you love, in a very severe addiction, and you're sort of afraid for their life or afraid what's going to happen next. So CRAFT is the philosophy, the approach, and Beyond Addiction is a really excellent book based on CRAFT.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier that you train attorneys about, is it about substance use disorder? Based on your unique approach and perspective, having lived experience, and then worked in the legal system, what is the single biggest misconception these professionals have about substance use?
Well, I will say this on the judge side. Sometimes I point out to them that most people who are arrested for drug possession do not have an addiction. And they're often very surprised. There's this assumption that drug use equals drug addiction, when the reality is that most people who use all drugs use in moderation, right? So getting arrested doesn't mean that you have a substance use disorder. And when I say that, they are often sort of shocked. There's that assumption that those things are connected, and they're not. And it's important because a lot of times when people are in that criminal justice system, they're forced into treatment that they don't actually need, or they're forced to do things that aren't actually helpful to them. And there are limited resources. Like there aren't in America, there's not enough treatment for people who want it, right? We don't want to waste treatment beds on people who don't actually have an addiction. So I have that conversation. But the other thing is that the substance use disorder rate, the addiction rate in the legal profession is very high. It's double the national average. And so part of what I talk to them about is why that is, and what they could do for their own mental health and life to reduce their risk or to sort of intervene in that issue at an earlier stage. So it's sort of both of those areas that I talk to them about.
Wow. And this would be my final question. For someone who is listening right now, and might be struggling with their own addiction, trauma, and mental health issues, fearful of what the future holds. Sometimes they see it's impossible. What is one piece of hope can you offer to help them make the right decision?
I will say that when I went to rehab, I did not believe I could get sober. Like it wasn't that I wanted to keep using drugs. It was sort of beyond my imagination because I knew I was using the drugs for pain management. And I thought if I stop using the drugs, what's going to happen? You know, I'm going to commit suicide or I'm going to have a psychotic break. I didn't believe it was possible. So you can start the process and have no confidence in your ability to be successful. Just start the process. For me, I was miserable where I was. I was very stuck. I was willing to see what they have to offer. What would rehab do for me? Even if I didn't think I could get sober, I thought maybe I could do better. Maybe I would figure out how to use less. So you don't feel that there's this artificial criteria that you can't start the process until you're 100% sure you want to get sober 100% of the time, because that's not how most of us start. Start where you are, start learning, start understanding your conditions, start thinking about it, start meeting people who have succeeded so that you can start to see that it's an actual possibility. Look at getting what are my treatment opportunities in my community, whatever it is. Don't wait till you're sure. I wasn't sure. I used 3 times in the first 5 months. I have 31 years. Most of us start without that certainty, without that confidence that we can actually succeed.
Question, working with so many people who have had addiction, and I've tried to sort of help a couple of people who'd suffered from addiction. And one of the biggest challenges I seem to see was that they would almost overdose. They'd end up in the hospital. As soon as the drugs were out of the system, they'd literally put them out on the street, even if they had nowhere to go, even if it was like minus 15 outside. And that cycle of, you know, not having any housing and not having any stability, with the only option being going and living with your abuser. Like I literally know someone who got arrested just for the sake of, they felt was the only way they could actually get help and get some kind of treatment, because they just kept getting thrown back out. Is there any kind of guidance or advice that you may have in this area?
There is an increasing push, for example, for emergency rooms to have processes in place to hook people up to treatment or to medication. So particularly for opioid use disorder, there is medication, methadone and buprenorphine medication that will cut their risk of fatal overdose in half, that will reduce their cravings, that will make it so they're not in withdrawal. A lot of people leave the ER because they're in withdrawal, and the withdrawal isn't being treated. I mean, of course they're going to leave. They're in pain, discomfort. So for anyone who's looking at their local community, what the community could do better, getting up systems in place in emergency rooms to handle withdrawal, to offer medication, and to be a linkage to, you know, short-term housing or to treatment beds or whatever that is, that has a really big impact on the likelihood that someone who ends up in the for an overdose or for anything else that's, you know, got an addiction, that they're going to have a chance of success because we're offering them the path out. But you're right, it's complicated because a lot of times there are housing issues, or I mean, housing for people with substance use disorders often requires abstinence to get in, but most people aren't already abstinent. And so there's a housing first movement where you house people without requiring abstinence. I mean, sober housing can be helpful too when people get there so that they're not exposed to other people doing drugs. But in the beginning, being housed, I mean, when I think about living on the street, being unhoused is a trauma, right? Every day you're being traumatized, and you don't have a regular address, and you don't often have a regular phone number, and you don't have a calendar or, you know, a sense of dates, and we're expecting you to figure it all out and get sober. That's an unfair expectation. But one place that people in their local community could focus on is trying to make sure that their ER system has what are called linkages to treatment facilities, to medication, and at least to short-term housing.
Thank you. Now we were nearing the end, so we're going to do our rapid fire, where Sherman asks you a few questions and just kind of give us your gut feeling, instinct answer to it.
Okay, I'll do it.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Best book you've read in the past year?
Oh gosh, that's hard. I read the new Gabor Mate, The Myth of Normal.
Guilty pleasure?
Chocolate.
Biggest pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve really right now is when people feel like they're failing the process, the recovery, when they aren't offered what they need to get sober. It drives me freaking crazy. I mean, every time I talk to a family member, this comes up, and it's more than a pet peeve, but it's definitely my biggest pet peeve.
Morning person or night owl?
Morning.
A song that always put you in a good mood?
My husband's voice.
What's on your podcast playlist right now?
Recovery Rocks just got rebooted, and I'm friends with Lisa Smith, and that's a really excellent podcast. I listen to a number of mental health and recovery focused podcasts. She Recovers, I'm on the board, and they are restarting their podcast, and they always have excellent guests. So those are two that are getting rebooted that I'm really excited about.
The most important quality you look for in a friend?
In a friend, I guess I would say honesty.
Judge Judy or Judge John Hugman?
I don't know them. I really don't watch this kind of. I've seen Judge Judy like twice. I know her, but I don't know the other. Judge Judy, I will say, if she was a judge in an actual court, they would write her up for her tone. You're not allowed to talk to people like that.
What's a word or phrase you overuse?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I don't, to my knowledge, I don't have one right now, but I'll look for it.
Finally, finish the sentence. It's never too late to.
Start over.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Transforming Lives podcast panel. Mary Beth, it was so enlightening listening to you. And I know that you're going to be such an inspiration for so many, because the journey that you went through, home abuse, as you said, so often that's what causes the PTSD and the abuse and the anxiety and that cycle. But seeing someone like yourself who has, was addicted for a very long time, but fought through and has come in being so resilient and is now making such a huge difference in the lives of so many others. That's so inspiring. And I know that this is going to be one of our most popular episodes, because it's just, it shows that there is that path, and that even if it takes a long time, you can do it.
Yes, exactly right. I mean, my goal right now is sort of to educate, to reduce stigma by saying, I shot meth and look at me now, and it is to offer hope and reassurance that a bright future is possible if we can just get the help that we need. So I'm glad to hear that that's how it's coming across, because that's really my primary purpose at this point.
Thank you.